Matthew chapter 2, the Magi. The last we hear about the Magi is in verse 13, verse 12. Having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. In other words, they outsmarted, well, no, that's not true. They didn't, but God did. He outsmarted Herod. Sorry. A thing that strikes me as interesting in this Matthew narrative is the number of dreams that are involved in the story. Joseph, in a dream, is instructed by the angel, by God, to not be afraid, take Mary home as your wife. And then now the Magi are warned in a dream or told in a dream not to go home the way they came. If you look at the bigger story, combining Matthew and Luke, you get what is that called? The prequel, where Zechariah and Elizabeth have a child in their old age, and there are visions. I don't know if it was a vision. I think an angel actually visited Zechariah and told him they were going to have a child. An angel not told Mary she was going to have a child. There's just a lot of this God interacting in directly with angels and through dreams. I don't know quite what to make of that, other than to say God knows what is necessary, and he does that stuff. He's not a lapdog. You don't tell him what to do. I don't think, honestly, I don't think any of the people that he interacted with in this narrative expected him to or asked him to. Now, I don't want to minimize God's concern for us and his design for our lives, but I kind of feel like it's worth pointing out that none of these people rubbed the bottle and God the genie came out. I think there are some Christians and some Christian teachers who, just from what I read and hear, that's kind of what they want to do. And I don't think that's, all right, keep going, Steve. Well, in verse 13, the Magi have left. They took a different route. They didn't go back through Jerusalem. They didn't go back and talk to Herod. Verse 13, when they had gone, the Magi, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, another dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. Now, I think for me, for a long, long time, I read that and thought, yeah, they go to Egypt. Well, think about this, okay? There's no reason for us to read into this that Mary, Joseph, and Jesus had moved back to Joseph's hometown in Nazareth and Mary's hometown. As a matter of fact, it's the indication is, since the prophecy was that Jesus would be born in Bethlehem, that's where the Magi found him, still in Bethlehem, but not at I talked about this before, not at the inn, not in the cave, but in a house. Now, in a few more verses, we're going to get an indication of the time frame involved here. But I think we're safe in thinking that Mary and Joseph had established a home. They were in a house, okay? The Magi come, and it's quite amazing. Then they leave, and Joseph, there's no reason to believe this was not at night, goes to sleep, has a vivid, disturbing dream. Get up. Now, I mean, I'm looking at that and going, I think the angel is saying, hey, don't think about this and don't make a big plan. Get up and get going. It is also interesting to me that God has provided means for this. They left their home. They didn't leave the hotel. They had begun to establish a home in Bethlehem. I think it's even safe to say Joseph had begun to work his business. So it's not like, oh, hey, just go. You got to cut your losses here and go. So in verse 14, he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt. Okay, here's something I really admire about Joseph. He never bargains with God. When he has these dreams, and he is communicated with by God, he just obeys. And in this case, he didn't mess around. He didn't try to close his accounts. He didn't try to, they just up and left. And in verse 15, they stayed until the death of Herod. Okay, we know that they didn't stay longer. They had moved back out of Egypt by the time Jesus was 12, because that's when we pick up the story of him in the temple, amazing the priests there. We don't know really how long, except we can pinpoint when Herod died. But they stayed in Egypt until they got word. And Matthew records, and so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet. Out of Egypt I call my son. That's Hosea. If you got footnotes in your Bible, you can see that. Now, verse 16. When Herod realized he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. This was kind of his pattern. You don't want to make Herod mad at you. Listen to this. He was furious and gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and the vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he learned from the Magi. So now here we go. There's a real strong chance that Mary and Joseph had been there in Bethlehem for 2 years. That's long enough to get some roots in. And can you imagine? We really can't imagine. There are places on the globe where this happens still today, where someone in authority, someone who rules, sends people and they just annihilate populations. Can you imagine the horror? Excuse me, in Bethlehem and the vicinity. It's like, gosh, what a wicked. I run out of adjectives for Herod. He was scum. He murders all the baby boys. Now let's think about this, because there's another time that something similar happened in the book of Exodus. The Israelites had begun to thrive as a group, and their numbers were overwhelming to Pharaoh. He decided, we'll reduce their numbers, and here was the plan. You remember, baby boys were to be thrown into the Nile River. Either they would drown or they would be eaten by crocodiles. Heartless, cruel. All right, now, I'm into opinion most of the time in while we're doing this. Here's an opinion I have. I believe, and I'm not a conspiracy guy too much. Well, I am, but this is not about a conspiracy. This is about what I see happening in our country. When boys are not raised, when they're left to make the world for themselves, there are lots of fatherless boys. And I'm not saying that a mother can't raise a boy. I'm just saying, when you attack by intention or by some kind of a secondary outcome, boys in a culture, well, I just see there's a little bit of a parallel there. And all I'm saying is, let's not sacrifice our boys. So Herod orders that all the boy babies 2 years old and younger, I don't know how many that was. I just know how, well, I can imagine, but only a fraction of the horror that would have been. Verse 17, then it was said through the prophet what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. There are people who, when they read things like this in the Bible, they're going, how can a good God let these horrible things happen? Don't have a great answer for that, except that it wasn't God that did this. It was Herod. Herod was evil, and he had power. When evil people have power, bad things, inhumane, ungodly things happen. I don't care what decade you're living in, what millennia. It's always that way. And it always will be. I can't bring a lot of comfort through this, other than the fact that God, well, he protected Jesus and Joseph and Mary. He didn't leave them to try and figure this thing out on their own. And when life gets totally sideways and confusing, I should be able to call on that same idea. Well, I'll try to do better next time on So Care with Stevie.